Good morning, Jay. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. Super pumped for today's interview because you've got quite the background, and you've also got a book that just came out. And for our listeners' sake, why don't you just kind of go right into the meat of it and explain to the listeners the event that happened that kind of got you where you are today?
Well, it was January 3rd, 1998. My dad and mom were in town from Philadelphia, where I grew up, in the Twin Cities visiting. And that day, my dad and I went out to a local hunt club. After we had a great day, we made a mistake and went to a bar and stayed too long. On the way home, driving home drunk, I missed a turn, went down a hill, and I hit a train at 60 miles an hour. And I don't remember, Ryan, much about that, but I do remember waking up in Hennepin County Medical Center in pieces, and I am in a lot of pain, and I am a mess. And people are working on me, doctors are working on me, and I looked up and I saw my mom and I saw my wife, and I could just see something was terribly wrong. And my mom leaned down to me and said, "Your dad didn't make it." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Your dad didn't make it." And I'm going to tell you, you don't know what pain is until you hear something like that. For all the physical pain I was in, that was masked compared to now the emotional pain. And I just went to a really bad spot. And I had no foundation in any kind of faith at this point, so I was just spiraling out of control. And so for the next few days, I'd go through a lot of operations, and my wife looked at me, and she said later, she says, "I looked in your eyes, and you were gone." And I could see her, and I could see her talking to me, but I just couldn't hear her. You know, it was a weird place to be. And she had, and other people had, a bunch of priests and pastors were coming in to try and help me, and I'd kick them out of the room. I said, "Get out. Don't you understand? I'm responsible for my dad's death." And that's where I was for 3 or 4 days, just in a bad spot. And then one day, nobody's in the room, and a total stranger comes in, and he's talking to me, and for some reason I'm listening to him because he's using words like sinner and forgiveness. And I said, "Man, I feel like I'm at the top of the sinner list. I was drinking and driving, and I lost my dad, who I respected and admired." And I just said this prayer with him, Ryan. I said a prayer to admitted I was a sinner, and I wanted to accept Jesus into my life, and I asked him into my life that I wanted to walk with him every day, and then boom, it was like powerful. It was like the Holy Spirit just connected to my soul, and I just exhaled all that guilt. And then he left. And I don't know how much time went by, but my wife came in and she looked at me. She goes, "I saw a completely different person." And totally out of the blue, I turned to her and I said, "Hey, hon, I just accepted Jesus in my life." And it was extremely powerful. And then, as you know, with all good stories, Ryan, and everything in my life just got perfect after that.
Man,
So
I honestly couldn't imagine because my dad and I are very close, and it sounds like you guys obviously were too. And I just couldn't. I mean, I couldn't imagine all the stuff, from business to all the, the piddly stuff that we have to deal with. I couldn't imagine what that felt like at all.
yeah, it was a tough. It was extremely tough spot. I received forgiveness from God. I received forgiveness from my family, quite frankly, my brothers and sisters, my mom. But I didn't receive forgiveness from the state. And the next, part of the journey is I'm in a wheelchair. I got out of the hospital, after a few weeks, and I'm in a wheelchair because I was in a wheelchair for a few months, and I'm reading a letter from the state, and it said, "We're prosecuting you for criminal vehicular homicide,
Man.
4-year prison sentence." And I was like, "What does this mean to me now?" And my wife and I would pack up the wheelchair and go see lawyers as we start to fight for my life.
How old are you at this time?
38, 38, 38, 39. And I'm on a fast track at Lawson at this point. And I'm trying to keep my life together. I'm trying to keep the business piece together, keep the family piece together. And I spend 6 months in a trial. And by the way, I'm guilty. This is not like me spinning this thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
guilty. And I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that where you're in a nightmare. And I imagine all of us have some version of this where it's really a tough time of your life where, you're going to bed at night, you're thinking about it. And when you open your eyes in the morning, you're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in this trial, and I'm thinking, man, 4 years is going to destroy my life. And so, what the difference though is I'm going through this trial is I have this newfound faith.
I was gonna say I couldn't imagine Jay going through that. Like, what would you have like? Have you thought like what that would have been like if you not,
I now I know why people get depressed. I know why they, self-medicate, because you got so much pain you're trying to deal with. But I have this faith now, and I'm really relying on it, so much so that, I'm worried about a bunch of stuff, but I'm reading the Bible for the first time in my life, and I'm reading Philippians, and chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, it starts with, "Don't worry about anything." I'm like, whoa, Lord, I'm worried about everything.
Right.
I'm really concerned here. Don't worry about
Got a couple
anything.
things on my plate.
Yeah, you follow, because don't worry about anything. He said, pray about everything. If you do this, you experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than you and mine understands. And I received peace. And what that meant is I could go to sleep, and I could get up, and I could fight for my life. I could meet my lawyers. I could go to work trying to keep the job together. And so this faith starts to become real for me as I go through this process. Unfortunately, Ryan, at the end of September, Lawson was having an event, and I missed the first day, missed the first night, missed most of the second day. I went to the event, and I got up to speak, and this was the first time a lot of people at Lawson were really seeing me from the accident. And my division had done great things, and I had a lot of great men and women working for me, and they had knocked the ball out of the park. So by the time I got up to speak to about 300 people, I walk up to the microphone, I receive a standing ovation, and I got to tell you, it's one of the highlights of my business career. And when I got up to the microphone, what I felt like saying was, yesterday I was sentenced 6 months in jail, 10 years probation. And when I describe to people in terms of life, I say, what kind of roller coaster ride are you on? Standing ovation, going to jail.
No kidding. So what was the standing ovation for? I mean,
it was the first time they were seeing me. The division had done well. We won a bunch of awards. I think I was using a cane, but it looked like I was healed.
So it was about that,
But it was just this affirmation of like, hey, who I am and the division and what you've done. And for as great as it was, I knew I was going to jail as soon as I got off that stage, or as soon as I got back. But what I say to people, I'll say that, Ryan, just like little dialogues we've had, what kind of roller coaster ride are you on? What kind of roller coaster ride is your audience on? It might not be as high as standing ovation or as low as going to jail, but you're on a roller coaster ride. Right? It's just how are you managing through this? And for me, it became, what are the choices that I started to need to make in order to not be defined by my worst moment? And
yeah, that's I mean, I can't even imagine it, because I mean, I've been through my own roller coaster rides, as you and I were saying, right, with the challenges in businesses and financing and all the personal family issues and stuff like that. But when you talk about those two highs and lows in one 24-hour span, I mean, my gosh, I couldn't imagine how you kept it all together.
Yeah, and then the process starts where you go to jail. You got to manage through that. You got to still manage trying to get to and from work. You got to. I didn't want my kids to come down and see me in that orange jumpsuit, so I'm managing through trying to see them. And as you go through all that, you're just trying to chunk your life and say, let me get through it. But it's the beginnings of making choices that I did not want to become a victim of my circumstances. And I see way too many people today just letting their circumstances ultimately define who they're going to be. And for me, I was like, hey, there's no way I'm going to be defined by this. I'll do something else, but I'm not going to be defined by my worst moment.
So what was the self-talk? I mean, so you're having those kind of conversations in your head as you're, going through your situation. I mean, like, what were the ways that you were dealing with it then? So if you're not going to be a victim of your circumstance, like, what are the things that you did to?
Well, there was amazing parts of the self-talk that become part of the choices. The self-talk is usually negative. Let me give you an example. When I was in the trial, here's how the self-talk went. It was like the toilet bowl being flushed. I said, if I go to jail for 4 years, I'll lose my job. I lose my job, I lose my house. I lose my house, I lose my wife. Yeah. My wife, by the way, we've been married, 29 years. She was an asset. But I could take a bad situation and pile on with some negative self-talk that wasn't true. Mm-hmm. And so part of me was to say, look, when I coach other men and other people, I'll say, look, you got to deal with reality. Reality already could be bad enough. You don't need to pile on with a bunch of untruths, right? Yeah. And so the real reality is know where the truth is. And when you do and you're prepared, you start to build confidence up as you go through really tough situations or even good situations. Because at the end of the day, Ryan, I would profess that life is going to throw all of us a bunch of opportunities and a bunch of challenges. And those opportunities and challenges are going to demand a response. And unfortunately, I watch way too many people just live by default. And they don't make decisions, they don't make choices, they procrastinate, they just run away, and therefore they live life in what I would call comfortably numb.
Yep.
And in that comfortably numb, they become victims of their circumstances and they get stuck in life. And I just like, life can be so much more than that. It can be so much better than that. You just have to make these decisions, these choices that ultimately allow you to not be a victim of your circumstances, but allow you to be defined by something else. Hopefully something a lot better.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, with our audience and, whether it's comfortably numb, and there's some mutual kind of context you have from the halftime where, you think about they call it smoldering discontent, where, it's, you said the victim of your circumstance, but, people that have, built a business and built, a very successful enterprise still feel that, and this victim of your circumstances, you've assumed this role, this identity with all these people, and trying to figure out how to use that to actually live a purposeful life is a very big challenge, I think. And so it might sound ridiculous to a lot of people, where you're a victim of your circumstance, but it actually becomes almost a prison to some people, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So the first choice that I talk about in the book, but certainly I would be dialoguing with you if I was coaching you, is clarity. And the reality of having focus is extremely important in today's world. I find that most people, Ryan, you might have the same thing, they're busy. Everybody's busy. John Wooden, the famous coach from UCLA, once said, "Never confuse activity with achievement." And I'm amazed at how many people are busy, but they're really wearing busyness as some sort of badge of honor. And I'll say, how are you doing? They'll tell me how busy they are, and I'll say, I didn't ask you how busy you are. Are you accomplishing anything?
Right.
And so to me, the beginnings of being able to define who you want to be is having the clarity of knowing who you want to be. And what that's going to force you to do is going to force you to pick and choose between what's important versus what's just urgent.
Yep.
And it also is going to force you to prioritize, because you're not going to be able to do everything. And you have to prioritize so you can say not only what's important from what's urgent, but let me prioritize things so that I know what I'm not going to do versus what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have clarity, in terms of what you want to do, both in your career, your education, your relationships, your values, and so forth, and you just let anything happen, well, guess what? It's the beginnings of becoming that victim. Mm-hmm. So the first choice for me is for you to understand, and for me to understand, what is it that I want to do? Do I want to have success? I'm a big proponent of having success and having significance. You don't have to have, it doesn't have to be an or dialogue. It can be an and dialogue. But you're going to have to make decisions. You're going to have to choose, because one thing I know for a fact is you can't do everything.
Yeah, and I think, I got a couple questions, because as we jump into the, your 5 bold choices from the book, I think clarity, to be honest, Jay, is like the hardest one for people. In how do you go, like, I'm sure when you're coaching, you're talking to people, you just keep asking why, and you can probably get down to the bare truth at some point. But, when someone's got to kind of reshift their train tracks, right, as what projection, which way they're going, what are some things that you've seen, and like, how did you go about the clarity? Like, what's important to you?
Well, I think I'll give you the detailed answer, but the first up, easy answer is it's something that you need to embrace. It's a question of what you want to do, you need to embrace. I got 2 boys in college. Well, when they're in college, what's the common question we're asking them? What do you want to do, right? What do you want to do, right? And by the way, I'm asking them that because, I want them to get off the gravy.
Because you're forking over the tuition, yeah, right.
I want them to get off the I want them off the gravy train. So I'm asking, right? So, but the reality is, it's a question that you need to embrace your whole life. I've retired more than once. I'm 58 years old. I could be a CEO again, and I'm asking myself a different question now. What do I want to do? And I answer it differently. I want to be an executive coach. I do keynote speaking, boards, and that kind of such. So it's a question that you need to embrace, not fight against. The way I did it, Ryan, was I was always a big goal setter. and I would write down my goals. And the reason I did that, I'd love to tell you it's altruistic reasons, but it's not. I was in my late 20s, and I read a report out of Yale University that said, they'd studied this graduating class from the 50s that when now was the late 70s, early 80s, and 5% of this class had generated more wealth than the other 95% combined. And I was thinking, if you went to Yale in the 50s, the demographics were probably similar. You were probably male, white, educated, somewhat affluent. Mm-hmm. So if the demographics were the same, what allowed 5% to generate more wealth than the other 95% combined? And the only difference that they said was the 5% wrote down their goals.
Isn't that crazy?
And I started to write down my goals. And initially, it was all about, work and career and me. And then after the accident, it became more, about faith and family and friends and so forth. But I always knew where I wanted to go. So even so, when I was in the accident and eventually I got out of the fog and so forth, I didn't have to go, well, what am I going to do now? I just went back to the goals and said, let me get back on track. And that was a big difference in terms of my ability to have that big windshield and small rear view mirror. I knew where I wanted to go. So I don't know if the best answer is for you to do to the extreme I do with writing down goals, but you have to have focus.
So just kind of curious. Sorry to interrupt, because I'm curious for someone that hopefully people don't have to have such a tragic event in their life to reshift from tangible, materialistic goals of, careers or titles or stuff like that. So like when you shifted, I'm just kind of curious, like, what are on your goals? So you've probably got them written down somewhere on your desk right now or something like that. Just kind of curious, like, what are the things that drive you?
Well, it was funny because when I went back and looked at my goals in January 1st, 1998, I could go back and tell you how warped they were. They were all about, career, work. And I shifted. I remember where I was spiritually, because at number 10 at the bottom of the third page, of 3 pages, I wrote spiritual. I wrote, have to go to church more often because my children need the guidance. I didn't need it. My children need it, but I had no foundation, right? So then now going forward, it's about faith, it's about family, and so forth. Now, with that said, when I was at Lawson, I was at XRS, a disproportionate amount of my time still was in work, and it was as how do I do it? But I just didn't let it become all encompassing and defining. The only thing that defined me was CEO of Lawson or CEO of XRS. So I was doing these other things. So that allowed me to start to say, how do I get in balance? How do I make sure that I'm not just all in on one thing? That allowed me to be able to persevere over the course of all sorts of challenges that come in any kind of work environment. And that's what was extremely important as I started to define who I wanted to be, and as I started to figure out there was other things in terms of, in addition to success. I'm a big proponent to say, you should be successful, go out and have as much success as you can. But and what else are you doing in terms of significance, giving back, and other things?
Right.
I don't use it as an or dialogue. I use it as an and dialogue.
Which I think is super cool, because hey, I'm an entrepreneur. All the people that I usually interact with are, and it's fun, right? Just because you've got ways to measure yourself, you've got goals, you can keep succeeding, but it can't be the only thing that you identify with. And that was kind of the main emotional journey that I went through after we sold Imaging Paths. I was like, okay, well, that's not me. So like, I've got to have, the balance of how do I measure stuff outside of just the fun of doing the next deal or growing your company.
And one of the things, exercise I'll go through is I'll say, Ryan, what gives you energy? And for me, it's things like outdoor activities. It's getting together with family, getting together with friends. And I'll go through your list, and then I'll say, well, when was the last time you did any of them? And one of the things where people will come up to me and they'll say, how come I'm so worn out? How come I'm so tired? And I'll go, because you haven't done any of the energy giving activities. There's a bunch of there's a bunch of energy sucking activities that you're doing, but if you're not able to monitor that and make sure you're aware that you need to do some of these energy giving activities along the way, because life's a marathon. Life's not a sprint. And so along the way, you're going to have to do some of the energy sucking activities. That's part of life. but make sure you're giving yourself the opportunity to do enough of the energy giving activities as well.
Yeah, I mean, super basic, right? But it's super real. Like some people don't like to be with people, some people like to be with people. And you mean some
Right.
people like to build and create or whatever, but yeah, and I think it's a very basic, but it's a very answerable question. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to think like overly hard about it. So you've got the book, the five bold choices. We were talking about clarity, and you kind of mentioned about balance. But I want you to kind of hit on some of the other ones, because I think there's your experiences in business and through your perseverance has boiled some things down to these five choices. And so I'm just kind of curious, where did they come from, and then we can kind of touch on a couple of the other ones.
You know, that when I was going through these events, and I usually describe the events of January 3rd, 1998, when I got in the accident, and then I was in trauma center, went to trial, got in jail, got out. On December 7th, 2001, I took Lawson public with a bunch of great people. We raised $200 million, had a $1.4 billion market cap, fifth largest IPO in Minnesota history. But those caps, that January 3rd, 1998 to December 7th, 2001, that's less than 4 years. And I did a commencement speech a year ago, and I said, in less time than it took you to go to college, I went from convict to CEO. And really what was happening then is I wasn't writing a book. I had to go back and say, I used to speak a lot, and men would come up to me afterwards, men and women, but mainly men would say, hey, how did you do it, Jay? And I'd say, I had this newfound faith. And they'd say, yeah, well, I'm praying too, but what else? and I would say, okay, well, I had to go back and say, well, what did I do? What was the things in addition to faith that were driving me? And it really came down to, it was these choices. And then when we put the book together, I did it with Larry Julian, and he would ask me again and again, well, clarity, what was it again? How did you do it? How did you do it? And eventually we came down to these trends and patterns that kept coming up. And those were the ultimately became the five choices. And they're choices that are available to all of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's awesome because, I mean, yeah, you can pray too, but you got to take your own action. Like you got to be, like you said, you got to be in control of your own circumstances and how you act on it. So I think these five, choices are, you have to make these five choices. And so, we were talking about the clarity. You want to kind of run through the other ones? And
well, I think the next one is really interesting. It's accountability, and accountability. Again, life's a marathon. You got to take some people along the way. And I describe accountability as motivational, and most people hate the idea of accountability. And I'm saying there's a ton of things that are positive about it. And I will say, the more change you have in life, Ryan, the more accountability you're going to need. And so, to me, everybody runs against it, but accountability becomes motivational because I have accountability to take my wife out on vacations or my family out on vacations. And when I'm speaking to groups, I always say, do you remember what vacations you went on when you were in high school? And most people can remember, one or two. Even though I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood with not much money, we still took occasional trips. And I would say, well, do you remember what you were doing in science class or math class? And so, for me, my point is there's motivation in your accountability to do things with your family in addition to whatever you're doing in business. But the main thing about accountability is that it's about continuous learning. Mm-hmm. And I will say, when you think about accountability, you usually think about failure or success. And I start with success, and I say, when you have success in life, do you celebrate? And most people don't. They have success, and they just move on to the next thing. And the reason they do that, in my opinion, is because, one, you haven't told anybody that it was your goal. Or
right? Or you didn't know it was your goal.
Right. So you just had, but if you had success, I would say stop for two reasons. One, celebrate, do some of those energy-giving activities, because remember, life's a marathon. Give yourself, some time to actually, rejuice the, yourself in terms of the marathon of life. And the other thing is, what did you do right? Because you might want to repeat it, right? So what's your learnings from it? Don't just run into the next thing. What you do right?
And what did you like? I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
What did you enjoy about it too?
All the above, And then when you get to the next piece of accountability called failure, most people, this is what they think about when they think about accountability. I looked at failure was nothing more than just a continued way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I failed way more than the average person. And I think, Ryan, as you know, different executives, they would say they fail more often than the average person.
Yep.
But I never looked at it as a final defeat. I always looked at it as just continuous learning. And I could argue I got some failures that are way, I got examples of failures that would, make most people pale by comparison. I had one where I missed a number at Lawson one quarter. I lost $200 million in one day in market cap. I go, beat that.
Yeah.
Beat that. So you come home from work, you're having dinner with the wife. How was your day? Well, I lost $200 million today. How was yours?
Right. Yeah.
But the reality for me, whether I failed big like that with a bunch of people or I failed individually on something small, I always did the same exercise. It was called debrief. And it was 3 questions. And I would ask myself or ask my team. I'd say the first question would be, what did we do right? And most times when you fail, what's the first question people are asking? What you do wrong.
Right. Yep.
And so for me, it was to change the paradigm, because I guarantee you and me or the team has done something right to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Second question I would ask would be, what, with the value of hindsight and new information and such, what would we have done, or should I have done differently? And the third question is, what am I going to change? Because there might be 10 things I would do differently, but I can only change 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, failure was nothing more than just a constant way to continue to learn. I was always running tech companies, and for me, it was about speed. So I could make a decision, learn from it, make another decision, learn from it, make another decision. Before most people could make their first decision, I'm like, good luck catching up to me.
Right.
No,
I agree. It's there's a book that's one of my very, very favorites called Mindset. I don't know if you're familiar with the book at all.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Man, you're just like preaching my language here with the failure, because it's about growth mindset, and you can't figure out what to do right, what you do right, if you don't know how to fail and learn from it. I mean, it's a good thing. It's not something that should be feared.
It shouldn't be feared. It's about learning, and if you have accountability and you have somebody there, by the way, somebody there that's for encouragement, not somebody there that's trying to give you a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And very few people go through the day getting any kind of encouragement. You then say, well, I can take some people along the way with me so that I can actually get that encouragement. Mm-hmm. I think one of the struggles, Ryan, is when we show up in the morning and I say, Ryan, how you doing? And you say, fine. And you say, Jay, how you doing? I say, fine. The only thing we've established is that we're both probably lying. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean if we're passing in the hallway. I mean if I'm trying to have a breakfast or a lunch trying to help you out.
Yeah.
So the reality is if I can understand and you can tell me what you're trying to accomplish, and I can say, Ryan, did you do what you said you were going to do? There's a lot of encouragement in that, and most people aren't getting any encouragement, and that's why I think accountability at the end of the day is motivational and greatly needed.
Yep.
And if you want to know the biggest first step you can take in accountability, it's to be an accountability partner for somebody else. Huh. And that will teach you more about accountability than anything I can teach you and trying to speak to you for the next 20 minutes, is just try to help somebody else out. And then you'll learn how much you need it.
Well, and from running businesses and, all the owners that I know, I mean, you're the one that holds everybody else accountable, but you need someone that, so I'm as I was telling you, in a peer group called Allied Executives, and you tell these people what you're doing, so that way next month when you show up and you either didn't do your stuff or you did it, or whether it's personal or business, you can have someone encourage you to keep pursuing your goal or congratulate you if you hit it. I mean, it's still important, even if you are the man up top.
Yeah, and it's motivational to know that I've got to go in and answer to them, right. So I better get it done, right?
I've been there, done that.
Right, and that's all motivational, and it's all important compared to just what? Noise,
right.
Busyness. Right?
So you got adaptability, which I want to hear your thoughts on that choice, because on your book, it's the personal change precedes practical change, and I think that's it hits the nail on the head for our listeners as we're talking about like a time of personal and business transition. I mean, can you kind of explain what you mean by that?
Well, I think, you have to embrace change, embrace adapting, because if you're fighting it, you're fighting it against winds that are blowing way too hard in your face. And the exercise I usually take people through is I say, in your professional life, your personal life, and maybe even with your health, maybe even your finances. If you look back 5 years, how much have you had to change in your personal life, professional life, and maybe even your health, maybe even your relationships? And I'll caution you to say, like, the phone and social media and all wasn't even here 7-8 years ago, right? So just think about the impact all that's had.
I know.
Right. So then I'll say, take the same thing and go forward. In the next 5 years, how much do you think you're going to have to change in your personal life, your professional life, your health, and so forth? Because anything you read, and I read, will tell you you're going to change more in the next 5 years than you did in the last 5. Mm-hmm. So, and your ability to your paradigm needs to shift, that you need to embrace the ability to adapt versus fight it. And that is at the heart of the message that you need to change, because it's going to be you're not going to be able to persevere through life if you're going to fight adoption. And I don't mean you got to be on the latest and greatest technology of everything that comes out, but you do need to realize that you're going to be changing and embrace it.
Well, and I think with the listeners and the people I deal with, and probably a lot of the executives and owners you deal with, change, when you get used to being the CEO or the owner. I mean, when my dad and I sold, he was the head honcho for multiple decades, and I got used to having that title, and all of a sudden it gets the rug. It's like the rug just gets pulled out from you, and you show up at these events like, who are you and what do you do? And you're like, well, I used to be. And so, like, how long can you answer as I used to be? And it's funny. I'll have the name remain anonymous, but I had an email that came in from an owner of a local business here, and I'm giving a speech that is about starting with the end in mind. Doesn't mean you have to sell today or anything like that. It's just like, start with the end in mind, because then you can be more adaptive, right? And he sends an email that says, Ryan, thanks for thinking of me. I never plan on selling now or ever. And it's just like, that's probably the least adaptable individual I've ever come across. Like, you'll eventually have to figure something out, because life just changes.
Right. And by the way, if you take that attitude, the government's going to own your business when you leave.
Right. Yeah, and your kids aren't going to get anything anyways.
No, they're not going to get any money, right? So, that's a fool's attitude, only because he's not thinking through the realities of what's going to impact him on an ongoing basis. And you and I both know the business world can change on a dime. Mm-hmm. And so are you flexible enough to change with it? And I don't know any executive that I don't talk to that doesn't tell me their business is going to change dramatically in the next 5 years.
Oh, it's so wild.
That's just and by the way, if you don't adapt, you die very quickly there.
Yeah.
So I think in a personal life, unfortunately, I see the same thing. I see people not adapting and back to getting stuck or becoming victims of their circumstance because of it. And if you want to talk about what was me, I'm just the wrong guy to talk to. Mm-hmm. I'm saying, you don't have to let that happen. You're going to have to, do something about it, but you have a lot of options for yourself.
Mm-hmm. So when you're saying like personal change precedes practical change, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, you think, when you look about personal change, you think about terms of just think through, what relationships are going to change, what behaviors and actions need to change. What are the, hopefully your values aren't changing, but do you even understand what your values are, mm-hmm. right? In terms of what they might be. I did this with my family. We went through our values. It's cool. My kids are a little bit older than yours, and it was easy. It was fun for me to say, not what do I want your values to be, what are they? Yeah. What are our family values? Because you're at an age where it was cool. We went through them, and it was fun for us to do. You need that awareness to start, because if you don't have that awareness, then talking about change is nothing but hard. People mm-hmm. don't change just because they want to change. So once you have that self-awareness and awareness that you're going to be impacted by things in the future, then I found me and people that I coach are more embracing and taking advantage of the things that are coming their way. And so the practical piece comes that, hey, I might be able to change my career aspiration. I might be able to change my job. I might be able to, change in this relationship because I'm healthy about it, not unhealthy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because we just had a speaker in my last peer group, and we were talking about like productivity, and it was all I think in lines of with your practical. It's like how do you practically change? And I like to consider, I'd like to think of myself as I've kind of got my like what's important to me, and we were kind of going through, and they're like, oh, how do you I think the biggest challenge everybody's got is to say no to things,
Yeah.
and I find it easier because like it'd be interesting with you and your family's vision or your personal life statement. They're like, hey, do you have a personal vision? And it's like, well, yeah, I do, and because then you can change and you can adapt to your surroundings and say no to things that don't matter. Like you said, there's just noise, and I think it's easier to adapt if you kind of got that longer goal of whatever it is for your life, because then as things kind of I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate it, where like you can put it in line with your plan, right? You can say,
I think it's right. Let me take a shot at this, Ryan. So I do a lot of strategy work with executives. So, and a lot of people like to do strategy who've never done it before because they think, I just get to go out one day and think about big ideas, right?
Not
get a bunch of stuff on the whiteboard. Yeah, but the reality of hard thing about strategy is once you determine, all the marketplace and all the other things of what you're going to do, the hardest part for a CEO is not telling the marketplace or the employees what they're doing; it's what they're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And CEOs' jobs at the end of the day is to make bets. You make bets and where you're going to put your resources, right? And every CEO, I don't care, you can be CEO of a large, Fortune 500 company, you're still making bets because you can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's so much energy and effort to go into that as a company, you got the same thing in your personal life. Where are you making where are you putting your resources? Where are you making your bets? And just like you just said, what are you not doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do everything. I've never met anybody that's successful at everything. Right?
Well, and successful tries to do everything. I mean, like, you just can't. I mean, I always love everybody talks about 24 hours in a day, and I think it's been overbeaten into the ground where no one can actually like conceptualize that anymore. Where there's 168 hours every week because everybody can think in a week, and it's like, where do you allocate your time and how do you deal with the things that come your way?
That's in the actual balance chapter I have. It's the 168 rule that I go through.
No kidding. I love it.
Yeah, and what I'll say is, if I list out all the activities that you like to do that give you energy, I'll say, how many hours a week do you sleep? And if you say, just say 7 a night, so round it to 50. I'll say, how many hours a week do you work? If you say 50, I go, yeah, that's 100. So we got 68 hours left to put all this stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll start to say things like, well, how many hours a week do you watch TV? Or are you on the computer? And 68 hours quickly becomes 48, becomes 28. And you start to realize that you don't have as much time as you think. Initially, it looks like, wow, I got all this time to do all this stuff. When you start to really define it, you go like, wow, you're down to like an hour. Yeah. And by the way, and if you don't actually choose what to do with that time, it will get filled up with other stuff.
Well, people will fill it for you, right?
Or people will, that's even worse. But people will fill it for you. But the reality is, are you doing things that matter? Are you doing things that are towards your goals? Are you doing things that give you energy? These are all the things that allow you to appreciate life more than become that victim where you're all worn out because you're not really controlling it. And the 168 rule is one of the few things in life that's fair. You don't get 169, I don't get 167.
Isn't that? I love it. I absolutely love it because so I go to Lifetimes in the morning, and it was somewhere, I don't know where I heard that as well, but I always love it because everybody's in their workout clothes and everybody's kind of neutral, right? And you probably experienced it in your past with everybody wearing orange jumpsuits. And the reality is everybody wakes up and has the level playing field.
Yeah. Well, the orange jumpsuit guys they got some disadvantages.
Yeah.
They got some winds blowing in their face. Trust me.
There's a couple bars in their way, right?
Their dialogues you're having with them is a little different than the Lifetime Club, I can guarantee. So,
but I mean, you went from in 4 years, look what you did, though. I mean, so I do believe, all things, aside from major physical and mental capabilities, people are capable of, accomplishing the things that they want to if they
And
put
you
the
have to be careful who you listen to, because I can't tell you how many people told me I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. You're a convicted felon. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. I spent no time listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
I spent all my time trying to say, well, I got this big windshield. I'm going forward. I don't want to listen to you tell me that I can't do something. Now, you got to be prudent. You can't just say I'm going to do something that's outrageous,
Right.
that you'll never accomplish. But with that said, I always say I have a really small rear view mirror and I got a giant windshield. And so I can learn from the past, but I'm always looking to the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that kind of goes into the fourth, because I know we went down to the fifth of the balance, and the fourth is confidence, right? And making sure you got confidence in what you want to do, and it's not everybody else writing your dialogue.
Right. When confidence, people would always say to me, "How is it you have so much confidence? How do you have so you know what you're doing?" I don't have any more wisdom than anybody else. I say, to me, confidence came down to two things. It came down to being prepared. There's got to be work involved, right? You got to put some effort. If you're not prepared, you're not going to be confident. But it's also about knowing the truth. And it was back to that concept of that, toilet bowl where I'm saying, if I go to jail for 4 years, I'll lose my job, lose my house, lose my wife, right? You got to deal with the truth. And what I find is when I'm coaching people and they're in trouble, they usually have this negative self-talk has taken them and added stuff that they shouldn't be dealing with. And let's just deal with your situation as it is. It's probably hard enough. You don't need to be adding other stuff to it. And you got to get through this negative self-talk. One of the ways to do it is you got to meet with somebody, back to accountability. Because I don't know if you've ever done this, Ryan, where, I got something in my head and I'm thinking about it, it makes sense, and I go to explain it to you and it's coming out of my mouth. I go, that sounds ridiculous. All right? And but 3 minutes ago it made sense in my head, even though it's ridiculous. So part of it is you got to just deal with the truth, deal with reality, be prepared, gives you the ability to have confidence. And when you have confidence, you got credibility. Mm-hmm. And the credibility that comes along with this journey is extremely important.
I'd love it because, if you're in confidence, I like how you said that it comes from being prepared too, because it's not just the blind confidence like you were saying. You gotta have, understanding what your resources are, and then making it. I think the biggest thing, and I don't know if this comes into your confidence, but I think so many people have a very difficult time just making a decision and then just being confident with that decision and then accepting whatever ramifications come into it. Say, hey, you know what? I this is what I want to do, and I'm going to learn, kind of what you're saying. I'm going to learn from what I figure out with my decision, but I'm at least confident with what direction I'm going.
Right, and that's why I said, back to how the choices come together is you got to have clarity, because you're going to have to be prepared, and you can't be prepared for everything. Right? So which ones are important, which ones you need to put the effort in, which ones you get the accountability to actually have people help you that you can get better at through the learnings of success and failure, and ultimately that starts to build on itself. Again, if you're trying to do everything for everybody, you're just not going to be good at anything.
So for our listeners that are dealing with this point of transition, that are kind of sitting in that that goofy, if you want to call it purgatory or whatever you want to say, with their business, trying to figure out whether they want to keep it, they want to eventually pass it on, whatever, how would you apply these 5 bold choices into understanding what their circumstances are and how to kind of take some action? I know that's probably a loaded question, but just kind of curious from the people that you've interacted with and some of the things that you've seen, if you've got any kind of very applicable ways to take these things.
Well, I think the first step is to get out of the isolation. I think especially men, we isolate ourselves, and it's a huge mistake. We got some really bad advice, and it was called "suck it up." And what "suck it up" meant was, get up and make something happen. And we took it to be, well, let me do it on my own. And I think it's a huge mistake, because you're not getting the value of insight from other people. You're not getting the encouragement. When I talk about clarity, how do I have somebody that I can really bounce my ideas off of? My confidence comes from knowing other people and building up my credibility. How do I stay in balance? By having friends and do stuff. So the number one thing that I think men and then executives, lonely at the top kind of syndrome, is you get caught in that isolation, and that's the biggest mistake you can make. So you got a journey. You got to take some people along the way. You got to get advice. You can get out of the negative self-talk by actually dialoguing with people. You get encouragement. So I think the biggest thing that starts with, Ryan, is I find is how do I help people? How do you help people stop from being isolated?
Mm-hmm.
Even your group that you're talking about is a big part of that.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
how do I stop you from thinking you got to have all the answers, yourself?
And I absolutely could not agree with you more, because it's a very unique example, specifically because of your background. But the human brain and soul wants to be with people, like, constantly.
Yes.
And what's the number one thing that we do to punish the worst people on the planet is put them into solitary confinement.
Yep.
And it's just like, and I don't know, when you talk about getting out of isolation, I think, to piggyback off what you said, is find the right people to put yourself with too, because it's not just anybody. Making sure that you're, I don't know where it comes from, but you're the average of their 5 people closest to you or whatever it is.
Yep. And I do that, and I say, look around at you're the average of your 5 closest friends, and I look around and I go, raise your hand if you need new friends. So,
yeah, I'm sure a lot of people raise their hand.
Right, exactly. So, and it is. I mean, it's a big deal because if you're isolated, I find again, I'll speak to. I'm sure it happens with women too, but with men, when you're isolated, all the self-medicating ways of helping yourself all end up bad as well.
Yep.
I'm a chairman of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, which deals with chemical addiction. So drug addiction, alcohol, gambling, whatever it might be, all of them take you to the basement. So to me, the other reason you don't want to isolate is if you try to solve it on your own, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time that ends up bad as well.
Well, and I know a ton of entrepreneurs struggle with that. I mean, they end up I mean, I know a lot of people. I honestly do, where they end up drinking way more than they should because there's no way. Like, how do you deal with the burden of hundreds of thousands of dollars in payroll? I mean, when no one else gets it, when their reality is people do get it.
Right, and we don't. But the goal here is to try and help people before they hit the train. Right, I'm trying to say, look, that when you hit the train, it's going to hurt. So let's try to not hit the train, right? So how do we help before we get to that point? And you got to get out of that isolation mode. Yeah.
I love it, Jay. I mean, you and I got to get you back on the show so we can talk some tactical things about. I want to hear on a later date some of your stories about your the sellouts that you've done with your businesses and how you took Lawson IPO. So we'll have to save that for a later date because I think we hit the most important things we possibly could have today. And you've got the new book out. You got a lot of stuff on the agenda for this year. So for our listeners, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you?
They can go onto my website, which is TrueBalance, TruBalanced, or they can get in touch with me at jay@truebalance.com.
Jay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.